LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 19th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 12 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. The political comedy sources for the last time this TV season will be both Saturday Night Live and HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. It was the season finale of Saturday Night Live with Alec Baldwin coming back as Donald Trump in the cold open with, I don't know, there were a couple funny moments, I guess, but I'm not going to show much of it for reasons I'll explain right before I showed that clip, and it wasn't really that funny, I didn't think. And then the Real Time with Bill Maher monologue will continue, not next week, but the week after next, and through some of the summer, I guess, but because HBO has different seasons, although tonight is the end of a really big season, the series finale of Game of Thrones, which I should be watching soon after I finish this broadcast. I don't know how many of you are Game of Thrones fans out there, but some of the questions in Game of Thrones final season are also the questions that we have here in our political process in the United States. How to dethrone Donald Trump, I guess. I have beating Trump and impeaching Trump as the two different topics I'm covering. Impeaching Trump is actually going to be the first topic, with Republican Representative Justin Amash from Michigan being the first Republican in the House of Representatives to come out for impeachment, making impeachment bipartisan. And then you'll see some coverage on CNN of that, and also that it looks like the House of Representatives may decide to start an impeachment inquiry because they need the powers that come with impeachment. And you'll see a couple Democratic members of the House talk about that, including Adam Schiff. And then the second topic I'll get to will be the Democrats hoping to beat Donald Trump, both some news coverage of that, and then who can beat Trump, and then who can beat Biden is sort of the subtopic you'll see, with a few candidates vying for that title. Bernie Sanders from NBC News' Meet the Press, Amy Klobuchar, Tulsi Gabbard will both running for president, have clips that I'll be showing. And by the way, if you follow along down in the video description, you can see my clip list here. It's split into the two topics. If you're watching as a recorded show, I will put time indexes down in the video description so you can skip between the topics. And that gets me to my first clip, which is on the impeachment topic. Donald Trump doing Alec Baldwin as Donald Trump doing the cold open with a couple sort of funny lines at the beginning, then breaking into this Queen song that I'm not going to show you because I'm too worried about copyrighted music based on my prior experiences on YouTube. So I'm basically going to show you the parts that don't involve copyrighted music, which is about a minute and 45 seconds of the longer cold open, available free on YouTube at a link down in the video description. Like, as usual, most of my clips come from sources you can find at links down in the video description. Here's the cold open from Saturday Night Live last night. The non-copyright music parts that I'll talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm very excited about summer. Getting around to those things I never have time for. Golf. Visiting friends in prison. And enjoying all the fantastic new tariffs from China. It's been an incredible year for our economy. Our American economy is on fire. I'm not going to tell you if it's a fire that keeps you warm or burns your house to the ground, but it's some kind of fire. So I'm on cruise control to a second term, and there's nothing the Democrats in Congress can do about it. So sit back and enjoy the ride, America, because tonight, well, tonight, I'm going to have myself a real good time.
Sorry, it's just this Queen music gets me all riled up.
And hey, Dad, why weren't we invited to come sing?
Yeah. Son and Eric. I'm sorry I forgot about you guys.
Well, I want to sing the song too.
All right, Eric, go ahead. All right, let's wrap this up. The NBA Finals are coming up. I need to invite the 3 white players over from McDonald's.
Wait a second. I have something very important to say to the American people. Something they need to hear.
No collusion, no obstruction, so don't stop me now.
And you can see I turned down the volume there at the end to avoid the Queen song and the copyrighted music. But there were a couple funny lines in there. I think I like especially I guess on Game of Thrones season finale night, the thing about the kind of fire that, I'm not going to tell you if it's the kind of fire that warms you or burns your house down, or made me think Dracarys, which, if you really want to see that, watch the Leslie Jones clip from Weekend Update. I'm not going to show any Weekend Update clips, but all that's down at the Saturday Night Live channel on YouTube that I put a link down in the video description for you to watch. Like I said, I didn't think the lyrics from the Queen song were all that amusing. I don't think it was all that well written. It was more like just a way to get a whole bunch of different characters in all at once in the season finale cold open, including you saw Robert De Niro with something important to say that hopefully we will hear from the real Robert Mueller sometime, they say now in June, and June's coming up soon, so that will be something to look forward to, that hopefully I can cover in my live clip roundups, maybe even a special Mueller live clip roundup if he ends up testifying in public testimony to a congressional committee. I do have an HBO Real Time with Bill Maher clip about the Democratic candidates and a little bit about the whole abortion debate, which I cover in the Democratic candidate section, but I saved that for the second topic. If you are following along on your clip list, you'll see that there's 5 of the 12 clips are on this Trump impeachment topic. The other 7 are on the Democratic beat Trump topic. But the first clip I want to show you is the only news summary on this whole surprise Justin Amash impeachment topic. And CNN basically had the best coverage of this entire topic. You'll see 3 of the next 4 clips are all from CNN State of the Union. Here's Jake Tapper saying that he's surprised. The state of our union is surprised about that, over in this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is surprised. The first Republican in Congress has now said that President Trump's conduct meets the threshold for impeachment. In a long Twitter thread on Saturday, Republican Congressman Justin Amash of Michigan released his principal conclusions after reading the redacted Mueller report, and he accuses Attorney General Bill Barr of misrepresenting the information, and he states, quote, contrary to Barr's portrayal, Mueller's report reveals that President Trump engaged in specific actions and a pattern of behavior that meet the threshold for impeachment, specifically, quote, multiple examples of conduct satisfying all the elements of obstruction of justice. The Republican congressman also takes a swipe at his colleague, saying few members of Congress even read Mueller's report. Their minds were made up based on partisan affiliation. This is, of course, just one Republican, one who has a history of bucking the Trump administration, especially on constitutional issues. But the move is significant because he is the first to break with his party on the issue, and his announcement officially makes impeachment calls on the Hill bipartisan. Republicans are already firing back. The chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, said Saturday night, quote, it's sad to see Congressman Amash parroting the Democrats' talking points on Russia, unquote. Here with me to discuss this and much more is Republican Senator Mitt Romney of Utah. He's also the former...
And I'm about to show you that Mitt Romney clip that is almost, or it's actually slightly over 4 minutes long, of Mitt Romney, if you can stand 4 minutes of Mitt Romney. I guess as Republicans go, he's not that bad. I mean, I would trade Mitt Romney for Donald Trump any day at this point. But what I thought was interesting about that news summary is you got to see the tweets there from Justin Amash, or at least some of them. Actually, if you follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/LiberalViewer, there's a link down to my Twitter account. Down in the video description, you see that yesterday, about an hour after Justin Amash tweeted his whole summary of the Mueller report, I retweeted the beginning of that thread because, and I said this weeks ago, if you read the Mueller report, the 448 pages, as I've read, and there's a link down in the video description to the Justice Department website with the Mueller report on it, and you can read the whole thing yourself, and you really cannot get to the end of that report, read it carefully, and come to the conclusion that Donald Trump should still be president. And Justin Amash, to his credit, is the one Republican who read the whole thing and came to the obvious conclusion, and he even came to the conclusion that William Barr, the Attorney General, was dishonest and spun the report back in the end of March when he put out that 4-page summary that didn't really deal with what the Mueller report really says. And hopefully when Bob, most Americans aren't going to read that 448-page report, which is one of the reasons I think that an impeachment inquiry needs to be started, so they can make the movie out of the book. A lot more people will watch the video of Don McGahn testifying about the strongest examples of obstruction of justice in the Mueller report. Almost all involve Don McGahn and trying to get Mueller fired. That's down in the Mueller report, and I'll talk about that a little more after this next clip, where I show Mitt Romney as the next closest Republican who is willing to criticize Donald Trump. He's very ambitious. He's so ambitious that he could go from, being the very centrist Republican governor of Massachusetts to being like a right-wing Republican to win the primaries back in 2012 and become the nominee. And now he's back, a senator in Utah, and he was one of the never Trumpers, and then he got Trump's endorsement. So he's very much a political chameleon, and so I guess he's showing where the good bets are for Republicans at this moment, and he's not ready to go the Justin Amash route, and his reasoning is pretty pathetic in terms of elements of obstruction of justice, which is what I'll talk about after we watch that 4-minute clip together. CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper talking to Senator Mitt Romney over here.
So we have a lot of foreign policy that I know you want to discuss, and I want to discuss as well, but this is the first time you've appeared on a Sunday show since the Mueller report was released, and you said at the time in a statement, quote, "I am sickened at the extent and pervasiveness of dishonesty and misdirection by individuals in the highest office of the land, including the president. I am also appalled that, among other things, fellow citizens working in a campaign for president welcomed help from Russia." You and Congressman Amash are the only two elected Republicans, I think, to express any misgivings about the behavior of the president or his campaign team based on the Mueller report. First of all, are you surprised that you two are the only ones that have really said anything condemning of the president's behavior as laid out?
Well, I think every individual has to make their own judgment. I think it helps to actually have read the entire document. It's a long document. It took me 2 full days to get through it. And the second volume is a more difficult one to get through than the first. So hopefully more people read it. But I think there are a lot of people that want to reserve judgment until this is all played out. My own view is that Justin Amash has reached a different conclusion than I have. I respect him. I think it's a courageous statement. But I believe that to make a case for obstruction of justice, you just don't have the elements that are evidenced in this document. And I also believe that an impeachment call is not only something that relates to the law, but also considers practicality and politics. And the American people just aren't there. And I think those that are considering impeachment have to look also at the jury, which would be the Senate. The Senate is certainly not there either.
So you disagree with the call for impeachment. You don't think this necessarily rises to the level of impeachable offenses. So you don't think that there's evidence, and there's sufficient evidence that the president obstructed justice?
I just don't think that there is the full element that you'd need to prove an obstruction of justice case. I don't think a prosecutor would actually look at this and say, okay, we have here all the elements that would get this to a conviction. So, everyone reaches their own conclusion. As I read the report, I was troubled by it, was very disappointing for a number of reasons, but it did not suggest to me that this was time to call for impeachment.
Do you think it's evidence that the president has disgraced the office of the presidency?
Well, I think a number of the things that were done were really, really troubling and unfortunate and distressing. Clearly, the number of times that there were items of dishonesty, misleading the American public and the media, those are things that really you would not want to see from the highest office in the land.
But not necessarily an abuse of power.
Well, abuse of power is going to be at a whole different level, which suggests an impeachment. I don't think impeachment is the right way to go. I think in part, one of the things that's difficult in order to make a case for obstruction of justice or impeachment is whether or not there was intent. And when there's not an underlying crime, I think it's difficult to put together an effective case to prosecute for those crimes.
You personally are somebody who has conducted himself according to a certain set of religious and ethical and moral principles throughout your life. I know you think about this and you talk about this. You've written about it. Do you think that the president has failed, based on what's in the Mueller report, as a moral leader? If not engaging in criminal conduct, is there a moral lacking there?
Well, through op-eds and through the things I've said, I made it very, very clear that I will support the president on policies where we agree. I'll disagree with him openly if there's something that I think is wrong for the country or for my state. But I think he could substantially improve his game when it comes to helping shape the character of the country. I think young people, as well as people around the world, look at the president of the United States and say, does he exhibit the kind of qualities that we would want to emulate? And those are qualities of humility, of honesty, integrity, and those are things where I think there's been some call, where the president has distanced himself from some of the best qualities of the human character.
Let's turn to some of the policies.
The president has distanced himself from some of the best qualities of the human character. I mean, that is one of the most erudite ways of saying that he is an evil SOB, I guess, or I don't know. He's just an evil, I don't know. I can't think of anything that's not profanity to stick after evil there, so I apologize for that. But Mitt Romney did not really... Mitt Romney's not a lawyer, but he came to a different conclusion from hundreds and hundreds of former federal prosecutors, which I was disappointed that Jake Tapper didn't bring up there when he said didn't meet the elements of obstruction of justice. What about all those prosecutors who said he did? What about the Mueller report? Especially, I was saying the attempt to fire Mueller, the attempt to get Don McGahn to lie about firing Mueller. Those are the ones where the elements are intent, an obstructive act, and nexus to a proceeding. If you read the Mueller report, down in the link in the video description, there's, for the acts I just talked about, Mueller said definitely a nexus, substantial evidence of intent, substantial evidence of an obstructive act, substantial evidence, and then definite nexus to a proceeding. Those are the three elements. So if you've read the Mueller report, you know what Mitt Romney said doesn't really make sense. He's trying to sort of be in the middle, trying to preserve his integrity while supporting a president who is lawless and criminal, if you read the Mueller report. So there's that. And then the last CNN State of the Union clip I want to show you is from the pundit panel, but on the pundit panel, they actually had a member of the House of Representatives, a Democrat, Pramila Jayapal, who I think did a good job on the Judiciary Committee in some of the hearings I've watched, and does a good job here of talking about not just about, you'll see Jake Tapper asks about the fact that Justin Amash lends some bipartisanship to the whole impeachment call, the call for impeachment, but the real importance of starting an impeachment inquiry, not an impeachment vote, but just an impeachment inquiry, is because of the total obstruction now from the Trump administration to all congressional oversight that requires an impeachment inquiry so that Congress has more powers, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch that clip from a member of Congress on the pundit panel on CNN's State of the Union this morning, answering a question from Jake Tapper here.
You're on the House Judiciary Committee. Some members of the Democratic caucus want to go forward with impeachment, but Democratic leaders have been saying, slow your roll. Does the fact that Justin Amash, a Republican, is now supporting impeachment, at least theoretically, mean that the people who want to proceed with that now have more wind at their backs?
Well, I think it's a watershed moment. For weeks, Speaker Pelosi has been saying this needs to be bipartisan if it's going to move forward, just from the practical perspective of impeachment moving forward. And I think Justin Amash coming on board means that there is now bipartisan support for really understanding the seriousness of what is in the Mueller report. And, you know, he says, and I think he's right, most of us actually, swing district Democrats and progressives, most of the caucus agrees with most of those conclusions that Justin Amash has around what is in the report. We have read the report. It very carefully laid out a case that really is pushing for the House to take on these issues. So I think it's not about the impeachment vote. It's about opening an impeachment inquiry and really having the legal remedies that are stronger when you have an impeachment inquiry. And I think we're very quickly headed down that path.
Former Congresswoman Love, let me just ask you, do you think
And like I said, that's the pundit panel, and I normally don't show pundits like the former member of Congress from Utah, Mia Love, but the clip I did show there from Pramila Jayapal, she's a current member of Congress in the Judiciary Committee, saying that she thinks that her committee needs the powers of an impeachment inquiry to fight the total obstruction from the Trump administration, not just on the Mueller report, but on all congressional oversight. And that point is made even more strongly by a member of the House leadership, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Here you can see Adam Schiff. This isn't from CNN's State of the Union. This is the one clip I'm going to show from CBS's Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan actually didn't start with this topic. She started with the immigration topic and had the nominee to be the head of the Department of Homeland Security on. Never asked him about the revelations over the weekend that there were another 1,700 children separated from their parents, more than the Trump administration had admitted up until this latest report. That was brought up by Adam Schiff in a clip I'm not going to show, but I did want to show this clip here, a little under 3 minutes. Adam Schiff talking about, in response to Margaret Brennan's question about whether Justin Amash's tweet, and you'll see the first one part of the tweet thread, the top part that I retweeted with the conclusions that he drew from reading the Mueller report are shown here by CBS's Face the Nation. So at least I have to give kudos to Margaret Brennan and Face the Nation for that. And then they let Adam Schiff talk about both Justin Amash and bipartisanship, and then also what you just saw from Representative Jayapal about the need for stronger powers of congressional oversight and the need to start an impeachment inquiry. And this is the last clip on this topic. Adam Schiff, which I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
It's a potential catastrophe.
Speaker Pelosi has previously said that for her, the standard for impeachment requires a bipartisan level of support for it. We saw yesterday the very first Republican, Justin Amash, who is a libertarian. He is no fan of the president, but still a Republican. He suggested that the president has carried out impeachable behavior. Does this meet the Democratic standard now to consider and move forward with an impeachment inquiry?
Well, I think that what the Speaker has referred to, and I have as well, is can an impeachment even be potentially successful in the Senate? We see no signs of that yet. And, you know, I respect what Justin Amash is doing and has said. He showed more courage than any other Republican in the House or Senate. But what may be pushing us in the direction of impeachment in any event has less to do with Justin Amash and more to do with the fact that the administration is engaging in a maximum obstructionism campaign against Congress.
You do think there is more of a movement
I
towards
think that
impeachment?
we are seeing more members that recognize that the administration is acting in a lawless fashion. Essentially, having obstructed justice is now obstructing Congress and our lawful function. And if we conclude that there's no other way to do our jobs, no other way to do the oversight, no other way to show the American people what this president has done, his unethical and illegal acts, as outlined in the Mueller report, then we may get there.
What you're suggesting, just to clarify, is that by opening up an inquiry into impeachment or proceedings into impeachment, it would allow you to get the information and evidence you've been asking for.
It may.
That it provides a tool, even if it fails.
It does. It provides an additional tool. And what we have been doing is we have been gradually escalating the tactics we need to use to get information for the American people. So we began by asking for voluntary cooperation, and that was not forthcoming. We followed with subpoenas. We followed with contempt. We may follow with inherent contempt, and we may have to follow with impeachment. There may be an odd confluence of interest here between the Trump administration and people around the president who want him impeached because they think it's politically advantageous, and an increasing number of Democrats and maybe Republicans who feel this president's conduct is so incompatible with office, incompatible with our system of checks and balances, that if the only way that we can do our oversight is through an impeachment proceeding, then maybe we have to go down that road. But I think it'll be important to show the American people this was a decision made reluctantly. Okay. This is a decision forced upon us rather than something we were eager to embrace.
Congressman, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there you have Adam Schiff's explanation that kind of complements the one from Representative Jayapal about how the Congress needs these impeachment inquiry powers because of the obstruction from the Trump administration, not just on the Mueller report, but on all congressional oversight. And that's definitely the stance of the Trump administration, and I think that is a position that the entire Democratic Party and all members of Congress, all Democratic members of Congress, plus, I guess, Justin Amash maybe, can rally around. I think that Trump has definitely committed impeachable offenses, and if you read the Mueller report like I said, the 448-page report at the link down in the video description, like I have and Justin Amash has, and apparently Mitt Romney did, but missed the point on obstruction of justice. If you read that whole thing, I think that you come to the conclusion that Trump shouldn't be president and that he's committed obstructive acts with intent and a nexus to a proceeding. Those are the elements of obstruction of justice, like I was talking about earlier. But most Americans, I think it's like 3% of Americans have read the Mueller report. I think I've gotten like 40 people to read it at the link by clicking on the bit.ly link, because I can track who clicks on my bit.ly link. So if you click on that link down in the video description to the Mueller report, you'll show me that some people are reading it, but it's only like 3% of Americans. And that's why I think the Congress has to bring in witnesses like Don McGahn and Robert Mueller, who can turn the Mueller report into a video that many, many more Americans will see than who will actually read the 448-page report that is so devastatingly indictive, is the only word I can think of the Trump administration and Donald Trump as basically a criminal president. If you've read it, that's, spoiler alert, criminal president, that's what's in the Mueller report. So if they can turn that into video that more people will watch, that's why I think, in addition to needing more congressional oversight powers and the bipartisanship reached because of Justin Amash's recent tweets, that's the third important reason to start an impeachment inquiry, is to turn the report into a video that more people will watch. That's my advice based on over a dozen years on YouTube and finding that video is much more powerful than some text post to some message board, live journal or whatever. Anyway, I want to move on to my second and longer topic in terms of numbers of clips. I have 7 clips here on moving from impeaching Trump as one tactic to get rid of Donald Trump as president to defeating Trump electorally in the 2020 election. And that was the main topic of the news summaries from 3 news programs. And I'm also going to start off with some monologue jokes from Bill Maher talking about all the presidential candidates, and then sort of morphing into some jokes about the attacks on reproductive justice, abortion rights, Roe v. Wade, which you'll see in the second to last clip. I have Senator Amy Klobuchar talking about women's rights to personal autonomy and to reproductive choice. And so that's why I included those jokes along with the jokes about the Democrats in the first clip on my Beat Trump 2020 Democratic Candidate Update topic, with Bill Maher talking about that over here.
I know, you're excited. Because there's now 23. I can't. There's 23 people running for the Democratic nomination for president. Guys, the Me Too movement does not mean you're running, me too. 23? De Blasio and the I can't. Or maybe it's a clever scheme, probably clever scheme to win in 2020 because the Russians won't know who to hack. It could be anybody, but no, it's actually, the more people who get in, it's better for the guy who's at the top, which is Joe Biden. Biden is pulling away, which is ironic because usually he's too close and you're pulling away. I kid, Joe, but it's kind of true. But you know what? I hope they get this right this time, right? Yeah! Because elections have consequences. Oh, yes. And the consequences are now coming to a uterus near you. Oh, that's right. That's what this week was all about. The long game for the Republicans coming to fruition now. Fetus Endgame would be the movie. We're seeing in red states, a lot of red states are having a contest with each other to see who can be more hardcore on abortion. Georgia made it illegal after 6 weeks. Women don't even know they're pregnant sometimes at 6 weeks. Alabama made it illegal at conception. Mississippi is thinking about making it illegal when you swipe right on Tinder.
And I told you I included the abortion restriction jokes because I'm going to show Amy Klobuchar responding to these latest abortion restrictions, and that life begins when you swipe right on Tinder joke. It reminds me of that. You know, I am an agnostic atheist, but I was raised in the Jewish tradition, and of course that means I know about the when does life begin under the Jewish tradition. I believe it's life does not begin under the Jewish tradition until graduation from medical school or law school. That's an old joke. Sorry about that. But that's the end of the political comedy, and now I'm going to show the actual news coverage of the movement to beat Donald Trump electorally in the Democratic Party. And the first 2 news summaries are from NBC and ABC. NBC has the longest news summary, over 4 minutes, where Chuck Todd, I think this is sort of the news bias because of the exclusive guest you have. I've talked about that many times as a type of media bias, not a ideological bias, but if you have an exclusive guest, you kind of think that story is more important, and I think that may be why Chuck Todd and NBC News' Meet the Press focused so much on the Democratic race, because they had their exclusive interview with Bernie Sanders, and I'll show a clip of that a little later. And apparently Bernie Sanders hasn't even been on Meet the Press for like a year. That's something Chuck Todd mentions in a part I think I cut out at the end of this. But here you see Chuck Todd basically making the main topic of Meet the Press, maybe because of that exclusive interview, the Who Can Beat Trump theme, both in the intro and then in the package. And he talks about the conventional wisdom and how Joseph Biden is basically taking the wind out of the sails of the Bernie Sanders campaign, which I'll talk about a little more with you after we watch that slightly over 4-minute news summary from Chuck Todd on Meet the Press this morning over here.
Morning. Once again, conventional wisdom has proved to be more conventional than wise. Not long ago, the Washington Smarty Pants crowd proclaimed that the Democratic Party had moved sharply to the left, that Bernie Sanders was positioned to be the clear presidential frontrunner, and that 20th century Joe Biden should seriously consider not running for the nomination of the 21st century version of the Democratic Party. Well, what a difference reality might make. Since he entered the race less than 4 weeks ago, Joe Biden has dominated the polls. This week's Fox poll is just the latest, showing Biden lapping Sanders and crushing the rest of the field. Look no further than the White House for validation. President Trump's near obsession with Biden is much more likely a sign of fear than of confidence. All of which is not to say that the Democratic Party has not moved to the left. It has. And I'll talk to Bernie Sanders in just a moment. But let's also acknowledge that we may experience Biden whiplash yet again. We haven't even had a debate, seen an attack ad, or watched Biden experience the gauntlet of the campaign trail on a daily basis. But what we're learning is that the progressive activist Twitterverse doesn't necessarily reflect the larger Democratic universe. And for now, at least, Biden is having his moment.
If you want to know what the first and most important plank in my climate proposal is, beat Trump.
At a kickoff rally in Philadelphia yesterday, former Vice President Joe Biden leaned into the idea that he is the Democrat best positioned to beat Donald Trump.
If the American people want a president to add to our division, lead with a clenched fist, a closed hand, a hard heart, to demonize your opponent, to spew hatred, they don't need me. They've got President Donald Trump.
With a mushrooming field of 24 candidates and counting, 2020 Democrats are jockeying to sell the perception of electability.
We're not waiting for ideas. What's missing is courage.
I know how to beat Donald Trump. I beat him 21 times in a row in court.
I know how to challenge this guy. I've been watching him his whole born life, his whole adult life.
In a new Fox News poll, 73% of Democrats call it extremely important that the Democratic candidate for president can beat President Trump. Just 51% say it's extremely important the nominee shares their views on major issues.
If Trump is reelected and he gets to put more people on the Supreme Court, it's going to be a nightmare for many generations to come.
That angst and Biden's ascension in early polling is driving a number of 2020 contenders to distance themselves from some of the more progressive ideas circulating, like ending private insurance.
That's not what I meant. I know it was interpreted that way if it relates to Medicare. But the bill gets rid of insurance. But no. It does not get rid of insurance.
And breaking up big tech companies.
That sounds more like a Donald Trump thing to say, like, I'm going to break up you guys. No, we need to create systems and processes.
Biden's rise in the polls has his opponents taking cautious aim, attempting to remind voters he's a candidate of the past.
Vice President Biden is a good person and was a great vice president. I believe that I'm the candidate for our times.
It's time for the generation that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan to step in for the generation that sent us there.
It is not the real world to think Mitch McConnell is going to embrace a major effort to mobilize against the climate crisis.
That 1994 crime bill, it did contribute to mass incarceration in our country.
While the progressive wing of the party sharpens their attacks.
Joe Biden is on the side of the credit card companies.
I will be damned if the same politicians who refused to act then are going to try to come back today and say we need a middle of the road approach to save our lives.
Among them, Bernie Sanders, who was the front runner in early polling before Biden entered the race.
I disagree with many of the votes that he cast.
I led the effort against those trade agreements. Joe voted for them, the war in Iraq. I voted against it. Joe voted for it.
And joining me now for the first time in a year on Meet the Press.
Yeah, there it is. First time in a year on Meet the Press, and I'll show the first 90 seconds of that interview after I show a couple more news summaries from ABC and from Fox News of the Democratic race. And, you know, I criticize that summary as being too focused on the Democratic race, not enough on some of the other issues, like Iran, that got a lot of focus from some of the other news programs. And I'll show Tulsi Gabbard in my last Democratic presidential candidate clip talking about Iran and American interventionism, even though I saw a bunch of people in the comment section saying they weren't Tulsi Gabbard fans. I'm not really a Tulsi Gabbard fan, though there's a reason I'm showing the clip, which I'll talk about when I show that final Democratic presidential candidate clip. I'm going to show Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, and Tulsi Gabbard there. But first, like I said, I have two more news summaries, and that last news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press, despite the bias towards the Democratic race as a topic, I think covered it really well in terms of Joe Biden's ascendancy and the problems that it's created for Bernie Sanders, and whether it's moving left or electability, who can beat Donald Trump, and then who can beat Joe Biden, sort of. And you saw several of the attacks. When I saw my Senator Kamala Harris, who used to be a prosecutor and attorney general here in California, softly attacking Joe Biden for contributing to mass incarceration, that was kind of galling to me. But I've talked about my problem with voting for former prosecutors, which includes Kamala Harris and then also Amy Klobuchar, who I'm going to show a little later. But Joe Biden also, if anyone, I think I said last week, I was kind of leaning towards Elizabeth Warren. I'm not a big Joe Biden fan, and that raises the question that's focused on more in this ABC George Stephanopoulos news summary, where they're talking more about just who can beat Joe Biden more than who can beat Donald Trump. It's, of course, a shorter news summary that I'll talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this Sunday, the Democratic field for 2020 appears to be set. 23 candidates now in, with Montana Governor Steve Bullock and New York Mayor Bill de Blasio the latest to jump in. The first debate's just over a month away now, and here at This Week, we are committed to having you hear from all the candidates. 10 Democrats have joined us to date, 3 more this morning. The big question now, can any of them break out and catch the clear frontrunner? Since his soft launch about a month ago, Joe Biden has dominated the early polls. Now, we all know how quickly that can change. Frontrunners always face challenges. But in something of a surprise, the former vice president has actually increased his lead since getting in. At his official kickoff in Philadelphia yesterday, he ignored his Democratic rivals and kept his focus on Trump.
If the American people want a president to add to our division, lead with a clenched fist, a closed hand, a hard heart, to demonize your opponents, to spew hatred, they don't need me. They've got President Donald Trump. I'm running to offer our country, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, a different path. Not back to a path that never was, but to a future that fulfills our true potential as a country.
Let's hear from some of those Democratic rivals now. First up, former Colorado Governor.
I don't have Governor Hickenlooper clips, or Seth Moulton was the other Democrat other than Tulsi Gabbard. I have a Tulsi Gabbard clip that I'm going to show because of what I think it shows about Joe Biden's vulnerability on foreign policy and interventionism, which I'll show as the last news clip before the bonus Dash and Sandy clip I'm going to show as the real final clip for those who are Dash and Sandy clip fans. There will be a brief Dash and Sandy clip at the end. But I have one more brief news summary. This is Fox News Sunday in New Hampshire. giving a brief news summary on the Democratic candidates that's really more about Fox News, really, than the candidates, and plugging the town hall they had with Pete Buttigieg, and giving kudos to Amy Klobuchar for having appeared on a previous Fox News town hall, which is makes Pete Buttigieg kind of, or makes any candidate a little bit naughty, I guess, if you watch the Jimmy Fallon slow jam with Pete Buttigieg that was briefly excerpted in Fox News Sunday also. Fox News Sunday clips, by the way, available down in the video description. And anyway, here you see just a brief news summary about Fox News in New Hampshire, plugging the Pete Buttigieg town hall, which I briefly I saw about half of it maybe as I was getting ready for the show, and I thought Pete Buttigieg actually did a fairly good job, and I may talk about that a little more after we watch this final news summary from Fox News and introduction from New Hampshire this morning over here.
And hello again today from the gym at Stevens High School in Claremont, New Hampshire, home of the Cardinals. And tonight, the site of our town hall with Mayor Pete Buttigieg on Fox News Channel. We came to New Hampshire, site of the first in the nation primary in just 8 months, to get a sense of where the Democratic race for president stands at this point. The field is 24 candidates deep, with Mayor Pete rising in the polls. In tonight's town hall, New Hampshire voters will get a chance to learn more about the mayor, and we'll see how he responds to moves Republicans made this week on abortion and immigration. But first, we want to talk about all that with a candidate who's already had her Fox town hall, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
And the clip after next I'm going to show you is Amy Klobuchar talking to Chris Wallace about the abortion bans in several states. I think 8 states I heard, and I heard 10 states on another channel, and you notice they had like 24 Democratic candidates in that news summary. That's something I meant to point out earlier. It's like 23 candidates or 24. How many candidates are there? Is it 23 or 24? It's different news summaries count the candidates differently, and what are they missing? You can let me know if you know the answer to that question down in the news summary. And now I have the actual clips from 3 Democratic candidates I had promised you: Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, Tulsi Gabbard. First, I have a little over 90 seconds of Bernie Sanders talking about beating Donald Trump in answer to the first question Chuck Todd asked him about Joe Biden, and how Joe Biden said the first plank. You saw it in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary that Joe Biden said the first plank in his climate change policy is beat Donald Trump. And I think actually Bernie Sanders had a pretty good answer to Chuck Todd's question about that, which I will talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
With something the former vice president said yesterday, and it was a fascinating way. He was talking about his climate change proposal. And he said, if you want to know what the first and most important plank of my climate proposal is, it was, quote, beat Trump. You have said, if all the Democrats do is focus on Trump, you lose. Essentially, Biden is saying, no, it is all about Trump. Your reaction?
Well, I think Democrats have got to do a couple of things. Number one, it goes without saying that we have got to defeat Donald Trump, who in my view is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. He's a pathological liar. He's a sexist and a racist, et cetera, et cetera. But that is not enough. If we're talking, for example, about climate change, what the scientists tell us is that we have 12 years before irreparable damage is done to this planet. Beating Trump is not good enough. You got to beat the fossil fuel industry. You have to take on all of those forces of the status quo who do not want to move this country to energy efficiency and sustainable energies. Chuck, what the scientists tell us is that the future of the planet is at stake, and we have a moral responsibility to make sure that our kids live and our grandchildren live in a healthy and habitable planet. That means massive investments in wind, solar, and so forth and so on. So taking on Trump, of course you got to do that. Right. But you need a real plan to transform our energy system.
Well, I think another way of looking at it is you have to win.
And as for that answer from Bernie Sanders, like the rest of the interview, and I believe you can see the entire interview at the Meet the Press link I put down in the video description, I don't disagree with anything I think Bernie Sanders said, or very little that he said. And I like his answer that you don't just have to beat Donald Trump, you also have to beat the fossil fuel industry. And, you know, Donald Trump may be a big problem for America, but there were a lot of problems before Donald Trump became president, and Bernie Sanders has been fighting those problems and has good solutions that I agree with, and that's why I voted for him in the primaries in 2016. But I'm still not committed because I still want to see who is best situated, who's best positioned to beat Donald Trump. That I think that is an important consideration for voters like me who have been long-term Democrats and want to pick, the person who's going to be president. The chances that it's going to be Donald Trump or the Democratic nominee are one of those two are well over 95%. The chance of a third-party candidate, very little. So if it's not going to be Trump, you have to vote for the Democratic nominee. And I did vote for Hillary Clinton in the general. I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary because I thought he was a better choice than Hillary Clinton. But now there are 23 or maybe 24 choices, and I'm still looking through them all. And one thing that I don't like about Bernie Sanders, that Trump has already set up this argument about capitalism versus socialism, and I've talked many times about how I don't like the way Bernie Sanders has labeled himself as a democratic socialist, and how socialism is really the government or collective or group ownership of the means of production, and like single-payer health care, unless the government owns all the hospitals and employs all the doctors, is not socialism. However, socialistic Republicans might want to call it. So I think that Bernie Sanders has kind of played into the whole socialism argument from the Republicans. That's one problem I have with the way he's framed himself. And so I'm looking for the best messenger. I'm not saying I won't pick Bernie Sanders, but there's so many, and I'm still looking, and we haven't even had one debate yet. And someone else I liked early on, but don't trust because she's a former prosecutor, is the next clip I want to show you. Amy Klobuchar, who I think does a fairly good job. Not as good a job as Pete Buttigieg in the Fox News town hall I watched part of right before I started the broadcast, but does a pretty good job of talking about the whole abortion issue with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, where he tries to paint the Democrats as the extremists after so many Republican-led states have passed extremist anti-abortion legislation. And I'll talk about Amy Klobuchar's answer and my thoughts on that a little bit after. This is a little over 4.5 minutes of Chris Wallace and Amy Klobuchar talking about Republican and Democratic stances on abortion and who's an extremist over here.
8 states have passed tight new restrictions on abortion that pro-life groups have been pushing. And as I say, dramatically restrict rights of abortion. Alabama would ban abortions at any point except on matters of the extreme health of the woman. My question is, if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, when you become president, what will you do?
If the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, I would make sure that we are codifying Roe v. Wade into law. But I think it's really important for the Fox News viewers to understand exactly what's happening here. These aren't nuances anymore. This is a case where the laws that they have passed in these states would actually make it so that no one could get an abortion. And at the same time, while we've reduced the number of abortions because of making contraception more available all over the country through Planned Parenthood and other ways, they've also moved to defund Planned Parenthood. So this is dangerous. It is a place that we have never seen. I think people have always warned that this could happen, and it's actually happened. And when I talk to people, whether they are pro-choice or they are personally opposed to abortion, a lot of them, Chris, don't think we should go this direction. 73% of Americans don't want to overturn Roe v. Wade. You have a situation here where they would actually put doctors in prison 99 years. That's what the Alabama law says. This is a law that they passed that would mean that if someone was raped, if a college student was raped, she wouldn't have a choice in that pregnancy from a rape. I don't think the majority of Americans are where the Republicans are on this issue right now.
But, Senator, pro-life advocates are pushing back. There's a group called Restoration PAC, and they are now running an ad on Facebook that we're showing right now, showing what it calls the party of death. 6 Democratic senators running for president, including you, who have opposed restrictions in the later stages of pregnancy. You talk about the extreme, as you call it, on one side. Let me make the case, and you can answer it, on the other side, because folks say that one of the concerns is that a number of Democratic senators are not willing to see restrictions on late-term abortions, abortions after 24 weeks as we enter the third trimester. Now, that's only 1% of all abortions in the country, but even 1% is 6,000 abortions after 24 weeks when a fetus might well be viable. Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with the law, Chris. And what the law says is that in that third trimester, it is allowed to protect the health and the life of the mother. But that's not what the president said, Chris. The president misled the American public. What he said at a rally was basically a doctor would be holding a baby and kill that baby. That's illegal under the law. That is already a crime. I know this. I'm a former prosecutor.
Forgive me, Senator.
That is
I'm
a crime.
No,
you, I think.
Are you okay? No, but let me ask you. I understand the argument against infanticide, and that's an overstatement. What I'm asking you is, are you okay with abortions after 24 weeks?
To protect the life and the health of the mother. That is exactly what the Supreme Court ruling says, and I am okay with that. But I just think it's really important, Chris, for your Fox viewers to know, because there's so much misinformation out there, that what these laws do is extreme. There are a number of Republicans who've said they are opposed to them. They are extreme. Then you have the president misleading the public and telling them that this is about basically killing a baby after a baby is born. That is not what this is about. That is a crime. So I think what people have to understand here is that we are at a point where it is not just Alabama. This has happened in Ohio. This has happened in Missouri. This happened in Georgia.
Right.
There's a law that's being passed in Michigan that the Democratic governor is going to veto. This is happening across the country, and people need to know what's really going on here. This is a violation of civil rights.
And that was a fairly good refutation from Amy Klobuchar, especially the way she redirected, or some might say dodged, by going to the question of infanticide and correcting that misinformation I talked about several weeks ago about how when Ralph Northam talked about, as a pediatrician, talked about the need to, sometimes when there are terminal pregnancies, that sometimes you don't give heroic measures and maybe like palliative care. No one ever talked about executing babies, but that's what the right wing picked up about the whole thing. Even though if you read the whole interchange, it's really about fetuses that aren't viable. And anyway, I don't want to go into the whole abortion debate, but I did watch Pete Buttigieg in the Fox News town hall later in the day do an even better job talking about those 6,000 abortions in the final trimester being terrible decisions that women have to make in conjunction with their doctors that they don't want to make, but because they get really bad news, and it's the only way to deal with the health or life-threatening problems. And anyway, like I said, I didn't want to go into the whole abortion debate, but I wanted to sort of contrast Amy Klobuchar's good answer there with an even better answer that I saw later from Pete Buttigieg. Neither of those candidates are currently my favorite amongst the 23 or 24 Democrats running, although I'm still waiting for the debates and other factors to make my final decision on that. But I don't think I'm going to decide on Tulsi Gabbard. I've heard a lot of bad things about her, some of which are brought up by George Stephanopoulos in the two parts of the interview here that I spliced together. First about whether, when she had to resign from the DNC because she thought Hillary Clinton was too hawkish, which I kind of think Hillary Clinton was too hawkish. And even though I don't support Tulsi Gabbard, I liked a lot of the things she said about American foreign policy needing to be less interventionist. And I know that she's been kind of championed by Glenn Greenwald, who I think is someone I need to listen to, even though I don't always agree with him. And then they also talk a little bit about Iran here, and I cut out part of the Iran discussion where they talk about whether whether Iran is reacting to American provocation or American military is reacting to Iranian provocation, and hopefully nothing's going to come of that. Hopefully that won't end up being a big story in the future. But basically I wanted to show Joe Biden as the front runner is vulnerable from the left on interventionism, which is the beginning of this clip. And then I'll talk about the end of the clip after we watch it together over here.
You resigned your DNC post back in 2016 because you thought Hillary Clinton had a hawkish interventionist foreign policy. Does that apply to her colleague in the Obama administration, former Vice President Biden?
We'll see what Vice President Biden's foreign policy vision is for this country. We may agree on some issues, disagree on others. The problem that I have seen is that across both Democrat and Republican administrations, and especially in this Trump administration, where right now he is leading us down this dangerous path towards a war with Iran.
He says he doesn't want it.
He says he doesn't want it, but the actions of him and his administration, people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, tell us a very different story. They are setting the stage for a war with Iran that would prove to be far more costly, far more devastating and dangerous than anything that we saw in the Iraq War, a war that I served in a medical unit where every single day I saw firsthand the high human cost of war.
You said we have to end the new Cold War, and you have taken a notably softer line on Vladimir Putin and Russia than some other Democrats and Republicans. I want to put up a headline from the Daily Beast this week that said Tulsi Gabbard's campaign is being boosted by Putin apologists. And, in the past, you met with Assad, you defended Russian military operations in Syria, you opposed the arrest of Julian Assange, suggested that Russian election meddling is no worse than America's historically. Do you believe that Vladimir Putin is a threat to U.S. national security?
It's unfortunate that you're citing that article, George, because it's a whole lot of fake news. What I am focused on is what is in the best interest of the American people. What is in the best interest of our national security, keeping the American people safe. And what I'm pointing out consistently, time and time again, is that our continued wasteful regime change wars have been counterproductive to the interests of the American people. And the approach that this administration has taken in essentially choosing conflict rather than seeing how we can cooperate and work out our differences with other countries in the world has been counterproductive to our national
security. Many
security.
Democrats have been tougher on Vladimir Putin than President Trump. Do you think Democrats are taking too hard a line?
I think that the escalation of tensions that we've seen between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, and you're right, it has come from this administration. It's also come from some Democrats and Republicans in Congress. It has brought us to this very dangerous point where nuclear strategists point out that we are at a greater risk of nuclear war now than ever before in history. And we've got to understand what the consequences of that are. It's something that we in Hawaii know all too well with the wake-up call that we had about a little over a year ago, when we got a text alert over 1 million cell phones across our state saying that a ballistic missile was incoming. Seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill. This was terrifying for people all across our state because there was no shelter. And even though that turned out to be a false alarm, it points to the very real threat we face if we continue to go down this path of this new Cold War, ever-escalating tensions, and a nuclear arms race. And this is what I seek to change, to build relationships that are based on cooperation rather than conflict, de-escalate these tensions, work out the differences that we have, the problems that we have with other countries, and also recognize that in examples like denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula, we've got to be able to work with countries like Russia and China to be able to accomplish that objective to keep the American people safe.
Congresswoman, thanks for your time this morning.
Well, I'm not a big fan of Tulsi Gabbard, and I think she was not hard enough on Vladimir Putin there for interfering with the 2016 presidential election. If you read the Mueller report, which I harped on a lot more in the previous topic, but I do think she was a good indicator of the way Joe Biden is vulnerable from the left on interventionism, as someone who voted for the Iraq War and had a much more right-wing foreign policy than I think a lot of Democrats support at this point in the life of the Democratic Party. So that's why I showed that clip. I hope you appreciated. I saw a lot of people saying, "Don't show Tulsi Gabbard, we hate Tulsi Gabbard," in the live comments along the way before I showed that final news clip. Now, I also, before I show the bonus Dash and Sandy clip at the end, I appreciate the super chat contributions I got from those supporters along the way. Here you see thank you, Lisa and Lulu. If you want to, you have just another couple minutes to give a super chat contribution using for the live viewers before the end of the program, or you can also support my videos if you appreciate the clips I picked out and my commentary and criticism that I added to those clips. There's a link down in the video description to directly support me on PayPal, or become a monthly subscriber on Patreon. At the $5 level, I give out these weatherproof vinyl #LiberalViewer stickers. Or at the $10 level, you get the sticker plus this ACLU Constitution. If you read through this, you know, takes 2/3 of the Senate to remove a president after impeachment. That's an important piece of information you would know if you had one of these constitutions. And then the final clip I want to show you is the bonus Dash and Sandy clip I promised you. This is, I don't know, it's been raining here in Sacramento, and this shows how sometimes the dogs can use their big, powerful bulk to displace the cats in our lives. This is Sandy taking over the window spot from Dash, watching the rain outside the window earlier today over here. And that's the show. Thanks for watching. I hope you appreciate all the time I spent on this Sunday and every Sunday for the last 317 Sundays, picking out clips, adding my commentary and criticism. I will be back next week and every week for the foreseeable future, and until next week, or until I have some other reason for uploading a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.